It's a tale as old as time. A charismatic, powerful leader rises to power, promising to bring positive change and modernization to his people. But, as we all know, the devil is in the details, and in Mohammed bin Salman's case, those details look pretty grim. Despite his flashy campaigns and suave persona, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's more commonly known, his human rights records are far from impressive. This guy has been accused of everything from cracking down on free speech to kidnapping prime ministers, to ordering the cold-blooded murder of a journalist. This guy's rap sheet is long and ugly, and that's just us touching the tip of the iceberg. And yet, despite all of this, there are still those who view him as a shining beacon of progress and change. So, what's the truth behind this enigmatic leader? Let's dig a little deeper and find out together, shall we? MBS, the son of the King of Saudi Arabia, rose to power in 2017, beating out more experienced contenders and becoming the prince of his kingdom. The media praised him for his progressive economic and social reforms in a traditionally conservative society. However, recent events have brought to light the darker side of his rule. The prince has been heavily and frequently accused of suppressing dissent and arresting those who speak out against him. The best example of this is the grim killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Picture this: on October 2, 2018, a Saudi journalist walks into the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul to get a document and disappears without a trace. The Saudi officials at first try to play dumb, but eventually they spilled the tea and admitted that the journalist got into a scuffle with them and, well, let's just say it didn't end well for him. Now here's where things get even more interesting. The journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, was a vocal critic of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's reforms, and some people think that he was targeted because of that. The United Nations even got involved and a report was released saying that the Saudi Arabian investigation was a complete joke, and that the killing was premeditated. After tons of international pressure, some Saudi officials were arrested and a few were even sentenced to death, though 2 high-ranking individuals were mysteriously acquitted. But get this, the trials were carried out in complete secrecy, adding even more mystery to the already suspenseful situation. And as if that wasn't enough, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman denied ordering the killing, but still took full responsibility since the murderers were working for the Saudi government. This incident is just one of the many controversies surrounding him. And ever since he's come to power, Saudi Arabia has been on a bit of a roll of executions, that is. Ever since MBS became crown prince, executions have been on the rise, and boy oh boy are the human rights organizations concerned. Reprieve and Amnesty International, nonprofit organizations of international lawyers and investigators focusing on human rights, have both sounded the alarm, reporting a massive spike in the number of people losing their heads, literally. In fact, Saudi Arabia is the only country in the world that still thinks beheading is a totally legit way to kill people. And since Crown Prince MBS came into power, the numbers have gone through the roof. In just 8 short months after his appointment, a whopping 133 people were executed. That's more heads rolling than a medieval jousting tournament. But wait, there's more. Amnesty International has also accused Saudi Arabia of using the death penalty as a way to silence the Shia minority of the country. They claim that these individuals are being persecuted for protesting against their treatment. And to make matters worse, Amnesty International has called out MBS himself, saying that his promises of reform are nothing more than a slick PR exercise. They reckon the human rights situation in the country has only gotten worse since he took over the throne. But MBS isn't too bothered by all of the fuss. In fact, he defended the executions in a 2016 interview with The Economist, saying that every single one of those poor souls had been reviewed by not 1, not 2, but 3 layers of the Saudi judicial system. All in all, it seems like Saudi Arabia needs to cool its jets when it comes to the executioner's block. Maybe they can invest in some ice cream trucks instead. Imprisonment of women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia. The year 2018 saw Saudi Arabia finally grant women the right to drive, which was a historic event widely hailed as a victory for women's rights. However, it was not without controversy. See, while Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was credited with leading the charge for change, it was actually human rights activists who had been fighting for women's rights to drive for decades. And just weeks before the ban was lifted, several of these activists were arrested, throwing a wrench in the whole situation. Human rights groups were quick to condemn the arrests, saying that MBS was trying to silence criticism of his regime. But MBS denied any involvement and instead accused the activist of having ties to foreign intelligence agencies and trying to harm Saudi Arabia. He even pointed fingers at Qatar and Iran as the main culprits behind the recruitment of these individuals. Regardless of who's to blame, the fact remains that these activists, both men and women, are still being held in prison today. And don't you think even for a second that his power is limited to his countrymen. Aside from being the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS is also the world's most notorious Prime Minister napper. Just ask former Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who had his phone snatched and imprisoned by Saudi security personnel during his visit in 2017. And as if that wasn't enough, Hariri was also forced to resign on live TV. That's a pretty rough day at the office if you ask us. But it's not just heads of the state who should be looking over their shoulders. Activists, academics, and religious figures have all been feeling the heat since 2017. MBS is cracking down on anyone who speaks out against him, even if they're members of his own royal family. Reports suggest that 2 senior members have been detained and dozens of other suspects of a coup attempt are also behind bars. From human rights activists to political rivals, no one is safe from his wrath. In 2017, the Crown Prince launched a massive crackdown on corruption, rounding up hundreds of wealthy Saudis and locking them up in a luxurious Ritz-Carlton hotel in Riyadh. While MBS claimed that the arrests were part of his anti-corruption drive, many experts saw it as a way for the young prince to consolidate his power and remove potential threats. But the plot thickens. Reports soon emerged that the detainees had been physically mistreated, with some even requiring hospital treatment. The mistreatment of the detainees raised concerns about human rights violations in Saudi Arabia and drew criticism from international organizations. Criticisms and condemnations. When it comes to taking criticism and condemnation, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is about as good at it as a cat is at taking a bath. Case in point, when Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke out against the kingdom's imprisonment of women's rights activists, the Saudis threw a temper tantrum. They kicked the Canadian ambassador out of the Riyadh faster than you can say diplomatic incident and froze trade with Canada. To add insult to injury, they even recalled all their students studying in the Great White North. It was like a toddler throwing a tantrum, but on an international scale. And let's just say it didn't do wonders for Saudi-Canadian relations. And it's not just Canada that's on the kingdom's hit list. Germany's then former Prime Minister Sigmar Gabriel spoke out against Saudi Arabia's meddling in Lebanon's international politics and their adventurism in the Middle East. That didn't go over well, leading to a 10-month diplomatic row that resulted in Saudi Arabia withdrawing their ambassador from Berlin and denying accreditation to Germany's ambassador in Riyadh. But Germany wasn't fazed, and in April 2018 they introduced draft legislation to prevent the export of weapons and other goods that may be used for human rights abuses to countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who were involved in the Yemen conflict. It looks like Germany wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers and start a little drama. Speaking of Yemen, did you know that the Saudi-led coalition's military actions in Yemen led to the death of 377,000 Yemenis? Of whom 11,000 were children, and the displacement of millions more. The destruction of Yemen. It all started when Saudi Arabia and the UAE decided to intervene in the civil war raging in Yemen in 2015, with MBS leading the charge as the defense minister. The Saudi-UAE duo started raining down airstrikes on the Houthi rebels, hoping to put a stop to their increasing territorial gains. But things quickly took a turn for the worse. With some questionable help from the US, the coalition forces ended up dropping bombs on everything and everyone in sight, including hospitals, schools, and civilian areas. Fast forward to today, and Yemen is facing what the UN has called the worst crisis in the world. A whopping 4.5 million people have been forced to flee their homes. To make matters worse, a staggering 24.1 million people, which is 80% of the population, are in dire need of humanitarian aid and protection. The situation is so dire that tens of thousands of people are living in famine-like conditions. Yemen has also had to contend with one of the largest cholera outbreaks ever recorded, with a staggering 2.5 million suspected cases and around 4,000 related deaths since 2016. It's a tough situation to say the least, but there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon. In April 2022, the UN brokered a ceasefire between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthi rebels, and just recently the two sides agreed to swap around 900 prisoners as a sign of trust. Here's hoping this leads to some much-needed peace in Yemen. And while we're at it, let's also hope that the Crown Prince starts playing by the rules and giving us a little more accountability and transparency in his actions. After all, we all need to be held accountable, even if you're royalty.